Hello and welcome to Cambridge Uncovered. I'm Barbara Anthony, former Massachusetts Undersecretary of Consumer Affairs and Business Regulation, and the host and producer of CCTV's public affairs program, Bay State Forum. But tonight I'll be your moderator for this show and what's bound to be a lively discussion on the relationship between the media and President Donald Trump. We bring to the table tonight a very well-rounded panel of guests. They are the Reverend Irene Monroe, Huffington Post blogger and weekly commentator on Boston Public Radio's All Revved Up and NECN's The Take. Kristina Kehrer, a multimedia reporter for CCTV's hyperlocal citizen journalism platform, neighbormedia.org. Donna Halper, media critic and historian and professor at Lesley University right here in Cambridge. And Chris Faraone, co-founder of the Boston Institute for Nonprofit Journalism, otherwise known as BINGE, and editor-in-chief at Dig Boston. Well, welcome to all of my guests. It's great to have you all here, so let's go started. Nice. So we're going to be talking about the relationship between Donald Trump, the media's coverage of him and his relationship with the media, and since he's been elected as president. Just for our audience's information, we did a show, I'm sure you all saw it, after the first 100 days of the Trump administration on a similar topic. So we're going to fast forward now to today and late September, and we're going to talk about the same topic. So let me just begin with saying, do you think things have changed since we got together way back when in terms of the media's relationship with Trump?
I think
just
it's
throw it out here.
Kind of gotten worse, actually. As we follow the next shiny object, and nobody is better at shiny objects than Donald Trump. He knows how to say something provocative, often about something relatively trivial, but even if it's something really important, whatever it is, he knows how to get the media's attention, get them focused on that, and meanwhile, there are policies being passed that are taking away rights from people, that are, limiting the number of immigrants, that are causing problems for all sorts of folks, and it's not even getting covered because we're busy following what did he say when he tweeted?
Right. Does anybody want to add anything to Donna's comment or disagree with her?
I feel like the media's been like that for a while, because even when Obama was president, there was so many things that were going on that you never heard of. You really had to go seeking and searching, other places than, since Trump became president, there's a lot of policies Obama passed I had no idea about. I only know now because he's unpassing them or getting rid of them. So I feel like...
So you think you were in the dark when that was?
Yeah, I think the media is also, they love the shiny object. They love whatever they can, nicely package really quickly in sound bites.
But see, I think that the media has become fatiguing. I think being a journalist today is really a laborious and burnt out kind of career. It has expedite burnout for so many of us. I think part of it has a lot to do with the kind of Orwellian kind of world in which Donald has created, one of which he creates like fictive narratives, and then he wants to solidify them for his base. So I think that the media spends a lot of time debunking that, and that's done intentionally. He throws out constantly, fictive narratives, and in someone who's trying to do balanced reporting, you're constantly sort of, rolling up a hill, and it's just impossible to stay, afloat of this.
I probably said this last time we got together, but it's now so more than ever, is that, as someone who considers, I'm an alternative journalist, an independent journalist, I've never believed in any sort of, so-called balance or objectivity. I just don't believe that it exists. There are things that are good and there are things that are bad. And I've always known that the rest of the media agreed with me, and now I really know they do. You don't go into writing about Trump like maybe what he's saying is true, because it probably isn't. There's a level of scrutiny put on him that's remarkable at the same time.
You mean now?
Now, more than ever.
Since the election?
Absolutely. It's increasing. I don't have numbers on this. I'm sure if they don't exist now, they will as soon as the first year's over. But newsrooms must be, the amount of resources going to covering the president are unbelievable. Things like we've never seen before. I mean, the Globe alone is, and given this is to pander to their subscribers too, but is bulking, is actually, as they barely cover the city council race in Boston, is expanding their newsroom in D.C. And we're seeing this across the board. I run a small alt-weekly. Frankly, if there was a normal person in the Oval Office, I don't think, unless there was something that really hit home in Boston, but the ripple effects of just all of these demonstrably absurd things that he's been doing or attempting to do really do. I mean, so even, my point is, even our resources at a small newspaper that covers local stuff, I mean, I've been spending a couple $100 a week sometimes covering national issues, unheard of before. So he's just killing all of us.
Okay, so may I just add something to what everyone said? In my media analysis course, I teach about the agenda setting function of the media. Like, the media don't tell us what to think, but they do tell us what to think about. And all of the stories that are being obsessively covered to the exclusion of other issues, that's got to be exhausting. My friends that are beat journalists, and I haven't been a beat journalist for a while, but my friends that are beat journalists are like, it's almost impossible to stay one step ahead of this, because the moment one issue gets beaten to the ground, suddenly there's another one. And the big picture, we're not getting a chance to really look at that. And the issues that need to be covered in many cases are getting short shrift because, oh my God, look what he just said. And whether it's true or whether it's false, the media are still doing that balancing act about how much of this do you cover, as opposed to some other issues that maybe don't seem as pressing at the time. He is news, and for his base, everything he says is true, but for the rest of us, we're just trying to put it into context, because whether we're capable of being objective or not, we still have to cover it.
Yeah, and I was going to say,
Reverend Irene, go ahead.
one of the problems is, it's like, where do you go then to find the news? Do you find it on social media? Is CNN giving it right? Is Fox telling it right? I mean, where do you go to really parse out the truth of what's happening here?
So let me go back to something that you said, Chris, a minute ago. You talked about two things. Number one, you saw, because this is about how things have changed now since the election. So you think that, is it correct to say that you think that there's more truth-telling now, that there's more fact-checking, shall we say, and calling Trump on lies and outrageous statements and things? Do you think that more of that's going on?
Yeah, it's not always, it's stories start with him a lot, right? So it's almost like entire stories are a debunking. It's like, fact, basically things that we used to read on fact-checking sites running on page 1 of the New York Times. It's
and the other thing then, and this is what Dawn is talking about too, I think, and Reverend Irene, as well, that the volume of the coverage, things that the media tries to cover. And I just want to say one thing about the Globe, and then I want to talk a little bit more about something else that as a paper, they're not the New York Times, they're not the Washington Post, they're not the LA Times. They're sort of in that second tier. And I have to tell you, I've been very disturbed by their lack of coverage of some very important things, such as what's going on in Puerto Rico. Instead, I mean, I'm looking at Aaron Hernandez Brain on the front page of the paper. That's a very serious issue, but there's 3.5 million people who are in a desperate situation. Today, they put some of Puerto Rico on the front page because Trump's going to go there. I mean, it's getting a little, it's sort of like, unless Trump's attached to something in the media, the coverage the interest just doesn't seem to be there.
And the other thing, and this is not just Donald Trump, this has been a problem with the media since time immemorial, lack of context. So Puerto Rico's in a desperate situation right now. Mr. Trump tweets, well, it's kind of their own fault. Nobody talks about the Jones Act. Nobody talks about some of the U.S. policies that have led to problems in Puerto Rico. Disclaimer, I used to do business in Puerto Rico when I was a radio consultant. I have seen firsthand the effect of U.S. policies on this island. And no one's talking about it. When I mention to people that there are laws in place that the citizens of Puerto Rico have no control over and no say over, they're like, really? It's almost like an afterthought. So given that you're busy just covering him.
Yeah,
Because I know what the Jones Act, like I'm, probably the less informed of all of you here, and even I know that. I actually did hear that on MSNBC. So I think we are getting a little more than we used to.
In all fairness, I think today the Globe actually ran an editorial on the Jones Act and some other legislative problems that could. But you had to go to the editorial page.
But this phenomenon we're talking about like Trump has to be attached to something that actually even trickles down to. And I'll beat up on the Globe all day, but to all the coverage around here, I'll give you a great example. That's my job.
Can I ask you something?
Well, let him finish.
I just want is that take like even they don't cover this. Nobody covers the Somerville mayoral race, the first one in 10 years.
Right.
But when Mayor Curtatone has a beef with Donald Trump, it gets a ton of coverage. And we just see this across the board. And there are really. We ran a story. We have one of the third biggest Haitian population in the United States, in Boston, in Greater Boston. And we ran a story a couple weeks ago about Haitian immigrants having to flee to Canada. I can't tell you how many letters we got. Like, thank you, like people who were I live in the Haitian community and hadn't seen this story. And actually, that story that we ran in the Dorchester Reporter and the Haitian Reporter as well. But those are stories that could be done. If you want Trump involved, there's Trump. They're local, immigrant communities. So there are stories to be done, but there's a lot of pandering.
I thank you for that. And to sort of piggyback on what you're saying, I think part of the disinterest in this reporting on Puerto Rico has a lot to do that it falls under this huge and it's not even a nebulous rubric of immigrants. People see Puerto Rico, and particularly since it's not part of the mainland, it's a colonized island, it falls under that notion of immigrants. Oh my goodness, are they going to come here, or are they going to flood Miami? Miami's already had its problem here. So it's that sort of, to me, is one of the subtexts in terms of why there hasn't been very much reporting. And then it seems even more so like a subtext. It's like he has so much to do, like report about the NFL and players, taking a knee to the anthem. And yes, sometime next week, Tuesday, I'll get to this.
By the way, the one thing I am seeing that I'm happy about is that a few of the networks actually have hired some reporters who speak Spanish or who speak some other language. I was very pleased that NBC and MSNBC have people on the ground who are bilingual, who are fully bilingual, and can go to Puerto Rico and actually get the story. Because one of the big problems historically with American journalism is most American journalists are monolingual. So they go to a country, and unless they find somebody who speaks English, it kind of cuts into the reporting.
And there's been some of that with the earthquakes in Mexico as well. I've seen Spanish-speaking reporters, which has been very refreshing, able to interact with the population.
I'm sorry, but I think when you have a kind of rhetoric or slogan that says America first, and the subtext, it's not even a subtext, the conventional image of that is white folks, then any person of color, even though it's part of U.S. territory, just doesn't.
American citizens.
It doesn't work that. It doesn't seem to work that way. And when I thought I got a sense of that was Katrina, because here you had this catastrophe, and they were calling Black African Americans. These were not immigrants, refugees. Yeah. So I think that's what they see other as, in that context.
And I want to get. This is a perfect example of, and I'm okay with this, of activist media. I mean, frankly, there's a million things that could be. I mean, Trump, the Alabama speech, besides football. He was basically warmongered for a half hour. I watched the whole thing last night. We're talking about billions of dollars, dead, soldiers, families. We can go on and on. But that was not what was cherry picked out of it, right? It was a football story because a football story is easier. When we're talking about, but on the other hand, the media did go after Trump for being lackadaisical on Puerto Rico, and for a guy that doesn't budge an inch ever. So I don't know, I'm just saying, for better or worse, this is a media behaving in a way that's how the conservative media used to behave. They would go after Obama if he didn't say something. We never saw this before. For ABC to be writing articles about Trump not talking about Puerto Rico, it's almost unprecedented.
It did take a while, though, and I think that the media's focus was also, my concern there is, what's happening here? Do we have to have the president focus on something in order for the media to think that it's newsworthy to cover in I'll say in an objective way. I mean, however we want to slice Puerto Rico, I mean, it is hard. It is a humanitarian crisis. Yeah. 3.5 million people, no running water. Just imagine that. Great horrible diseases will be breaking out. I mean, there's food shortages, people in hospitals. So why, it's kind of an interest. I think we've been, kidnapped by an alien nation or something, because it's like the media is now focusing on it. But I have to tell you, I really believe, it was, Trump, first of all, when he came out with that really poor, very bad taste tweet about it basically being their fault, and sadly the banks will have to be paid back. I mean, this was just so disgusting. So it got play, but it got play because he tweeted. Now, where was NBC, ABC, CNN, the Times? Were they there before?
Yes. Ali Velshi. Hats off to Ali Velshi. Used to be, I believe, with CNN. Now he's with MSNBC. He was all over the American Virgin Islands before anybody was, and he also was all over Puerto Rico. And so were and so were the Hispanic reporters on NBC and MSNBC. Agreed, it's a recent phenomenon, but if we're going to beat up on the media for not doing X, we got to also give them their props when they do the right thing.
Can I just say one thing? We also got to understand how racialized the media is.
Mm-hmm.
So if you really want to hear about what was happening in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and I'm one who vacation a lot in St. Croix and stuff, if I really wanted to hear that news, then I go to TV One, because they will have a reporter there and they will report on it. Similarly, if you want to really hear the story about what's going on in Puerto Rico, and this is not to denigrate what CNN and other major networks are doing, Telemundo. Yep. So we know actually where to go get our news, because we know that being other, perceived as other, although we are Americans, when even in telling that narrative, we question the veracity of it.
You also have to factor in the fact that many, many newsrooms are mostly white. And not that there's anything wrong with being white, but on the other hand, if you don't have a diverse newsroom, you may not be thinking about, gee, how does this affect the Haitian community, or how does this affect the Spanish-speaking community, or whatever, because it just might not occur to you.
And not just the face of the newsroom. I just want to say, I'm fortunate. I'm in a small alternative newspaper. We can do whatever we want. My reporters do whatever they want. That's why we have this diversity of stories, because they pitch them. At these newsrooms, we see a lot of, we're seeing more and more young reporters of color. It's old white guys most of the time, old white women sometimes, who are telling them what to cover. And their hands are completely tied. It's really unfortunate. Trust me, I'm the first person that a lot of reporters around here call when their editors tell them they can't cover this, campaign finance thing, something that they want to dig into. But it's unfortunate. But the people pulling the strings, that's why we see a lot of football.
Why we see what we see.
But and I'm not trying to plug your paper, although I have to say I love it. It's that when I want to hear, and it's under the radar, because you cover stuff that is really under the radar with a kind of intersectional lens. I go there and it reminds me, because I'm from New York, what the Village Voice used to be, or what the Phoenix used to be. Right. You have filled in that void for me, so that now that I'm parsing, I'll read this, and then I'll go, well, really, let me see what the dig is, because really you have the pulse of the community.
Well, I remember our last show we talked about how important, call it, media such as the operation that you run and other forms of social media that are not, quote, CNN.com or whatever, that particularly local media, whether it's the Post, the Globe, the Herald, or all of the paper,
Quincy Patriot Ledger has done some wonderful local reporting.
Oh, really?
In Worcester, whatever it is, there's a lot of local. We still have a lot of local print media in Massachusetts to cover these, important issues that are going on in your community. You might not have known what the Obama administration was doing in terms of Congress, but we probably, but there's a lot of things that are going on at the State House that we also don't know about. That we should know about, and that we depend, and no one except our local people are going to tell us that. particularly in terms of healthcare issues, environmental issues, infrastructure issues. We have to really depend on the local guys and women who can bring us this information, or we are not going to get it. And that's why I don't like to see the local people kind of, do the Pied Piper thing and follow along with the rest of the media. And if it doesn't have Trump in its name, it's not.
Yeah,
it's
see,
not
that's
newsworthy.
what scares
So
me more than anything else in the world is the issues that aren't getting, like the prisons, voting rights. I mean,
Voting,
if
of
Trump
course.
doesn't say anything about it, then we don't cover it. So
Let me just, yesterday, Joan Vanocchi from the Globe wrote a very good op-ed and or editorial op-ed, whatever hers would be called. And I just want to read a little bit because it is exactly, it is somewhat of what we've all been saying here. So she begins, it's called The Power of Trump News, and it says, "Sweetheart, get me rewrite." I guess that must mean something for you journalists,
yeah,
right?
that's an old comic strip
Okay,
thing.
sweetheart, get me rewrite. Okay. The company is talking about football players taking a knee during, the country is talking about football players taking a knee during the national anthem, not about health care. When it comes to agenda setting, Trump News, run by a cynically savvy editor-in-chief, continues to beat the competition. All it takes is some presidential red meat tossed out during a rally, followed up by a pot-stirring tweet or two. And then it says here, he loves to push the hot buttons and has no worries about bringing the country or the world to a dangerous boiling point. And she gives a listing of all the areas that are not being covered. She didn't mention Puerto Rico in this, which I found an incredible oversight. She mentions a lot of other things that are going on in Washington and around the world that are not receiving coverage. So what I want to try to do now is I want to talk about some of the things that have been that have happened and how you think the media has responded or covered some of these events. And whether good or bad or otherwise. So let's just start off with the size of the crowd at the inauguration.
Biggest crowd ever. Biggest crowd. It was huge, huge.
Right. Okay. So everybody agree?
I think it was important to cover that the way that the media did, because that was, everybody needed to know what that press office was going to be about from the get-go. Everyone knew Donald Trump was a liar. People figured maybe there's going to be some sort of something will be normal here, but no, Spicer coming out with that huge lie, the demonstrable,
You can see it visually.
But what was confounding for me was the Emmys. So here he comes out here repeating that. It's sort of tongue-in-cheek. And then you wonder, is he rehabbing he's trying to rehab his image, certainly. But does he know then that he was trafficking in lies? So that's the question, because he was the press secretary. So then what you have here is...
you're talking about Sean Spicer when he came out the night of the Emmys.
Right, of the Emmys.
Yes.
So what you have now is infotainment, so you can't parse it out.
Is that normalizing his behavior, do you think?
I think it was normalizing that the news is infotainment.
They may have tried, but I think that backfired. I mean,
you think it did?
I don't know. I mean,
I heard it did.
I don't think Trump
he got
supporters like him. He got beat up on social
media
media badly. I think that he's going to disappear for a couple of years.
Sounds good to
I
me.
think they were
Melissa McCarthy will be sad about that, though.
Yes, I know. She was there. Did you see the look on her face?
Oh my God, I know.
I mean,
Poor
she was
baby.
like,
Shocking,
she
not
couldn't
all.
believe what she was watching. Like, what is this?
They should have had her up there. She
Yeah.
makes a much better Sean Spicer.
Okay, so the press did call him out to be not telling the truth. It's a lie. I think, I can remember hearing the word lie. If you remember before the campaign, I don't really remember very much hearing the word lie, that what Trump said was a lie. I would hear, the fact is this, or this is what occurred, but it was never anybody actually saying this is a lie. I do believe that with the size of the crowd thing, as stupid as that is, it's not really stupid though, at least the media I was watching, there seemed to be no hesitation about saying this is a lie. These are the numbers of people, that's a lie.
Actually, the newsrooms, if you ever watch Beat the Press, which is a very good media criticism show on Channel 2, WGBH, they agonized over this, not just the four of them, but like they talked about how the newsrooms that they're all associated with, because we were all taught, those of us that have been working journalists, we were all taught you don't use the word lie. It's a value judgment. One person's lie is another person's exaggeration, or that's just how politicians talk. But there was just something about the repeated and egregious falsehoods that I think really pushed some people in the media to get off of their objectivity and say, you know what, we got to call it what it is. And maybe it's a value judgment and maybe, you know, bad on us, but somebody's got to come out and say, this is just not true. And I think once the genie was out of the bottle, and I think that's why a lot of Trump supporters believe that, see, the media are against him, because their version of things is that everything he says is absolutely accurate, and there you are.
See, I felt that once that came out, that pushing and trying to debunk the falsehoods, that we began to see how civil discourse had in many ways crumbled. And I felt that at that point it was open gate to say that he was a lie, because he's the president, so you want to be deferential,
Right.
you know?
I think the media always takes time to warm up to these things. You know, if you go back and even a respectable publication like the Globe 10 years, when they were talking about gay marriage, they would quote Chris Minot from the Family Institute,
that's
who would
right,
say homophobic, unbelievable things. They still quote prohibitionists, people who demonstrably lie about the effects of marijuana almost every day in newspapers, including the Globe. Trump is such a liar that, I mean, 10 years from now, they won't quote those people about marijuana, but it's going to take some time. Trump is such a liar. It's so frequent that time span went from 10 years to 10 months.
But it's making the media have to really make some hard decisions, though, because you have a discourse now that you have never heard in a leader. You never heard, even, you know, the worst righty or the worst lefty, there was still a way that people spoke. You didn't hear the president mocking people or calling them names
cursing.
from the or cursing.
Cursing.
And, you know, we all know that presidents swear. I mean, most of them do. But
I think if LBJ could keep it under wraps,
but that's my point exactly.
I mean,
there was
really.
You made a very important statement when you talked about, like, what are the media normalizing? Is it normal for a president to talk that way? This is supposed to be the leader of the free world. And, you know, calling football players SOBs, again, back to the agonizing in the newsroom. Do we run this or do we bleep it? And people just couldn't make up their mind because they couldn't believe what they were hearing.
And the problem with that, it was that he used such inflammatory language to talk about the NFL and their behavior. And he was rather tepid, almost to no kind of response to white supremacists.
Oh, but they're fine people.
Yeah. So, I mean, that kind of juxtaposition here, you begin to wonder here, how do you report on this and still have deference for him and as well as for the news?
So let me ask a related but different kind of question. And there are a number of things. We could talk about how the media covered the Muslim ban, DACA, Charlottesville, the Paris Climate Accord, Russian interference. There are, you know, so many it's incredible, so many low or high points, however you want to categorize them, that we can assess how the media responded to them. But I want to just talk about something larger, which is, do you think that there's that the media takes any responsibility for his election? What do you think about that, Kristina? Do you see any of that, or do you think they should?
Joe
Do you think they should?
Scarborough just recently said the media was hard on Hillary.
Yes.
No, I don't. I wish they did. I think they do underneath it all, but I don't feel like they overtly take. Because when you were, you know, they still want to find a way to make him a legitimate, good president. Like any moment that he does anything that's halfway human.
What do they say?
Yes.
Well, you guys know the examples. There's been one or two of them. The Van Jones moment when he said, now he's the real president, or that was very presidential. Or, I mean, I kind of feel like they have Stockholm syndrome. And I mean, that's my...
That they've been captured by Trump?
Well, that they just, you know, or... You do hear, like the Sean Spicer, the moment when it seemed like the press was finally going to be for real about something, the crowd size. You know, there was like the drumbeat of, okay, we're going to finally get real in the media, but then they'll just turn around and just their phraseology and how they cover things. You're like, oh, we're back to just whitewashing this as he's just the president. I mean, it seems like there can't be any conversation about Trump other than he's crazy and needs to be removed immediately. I mean, it just...
I think the media did a bang-up job, really, and I never give the mainstream media compliments. I think on Clinton and Trump got the the full treatment, unbelievable scrutiny. If you wanted it, it was right there. Washington Post, especially, did really. I mean, if you wanted to know about what a dirtbag Donald Trump was, you could find it out. It was all right there.
It was there, yeah.
And I think. I think they're continuing to do hard coverage. As for taking blame,
Doesn't
that's not
feel
how
hard.
reporters think.
Yeah.
It's not their job to take the blame. I
And
just want
I
to add one thing.
Go
Though.
ahead.
I think one thing that I'm just so tired of hearing is like this journalist media savior complex, where it's like if we had just reported more in the Rust Belt, people would be less racist. All this that is just
No, that's
just
insane.
crazy talk.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to see more efforts in some of those areas now. But that's not how the media works.
May I
Yeah.
semi-disagree? May I semi-disagree with one thing that was said here? I think the media do have something to answer for because they pick winners and losers. And what I mean is, for example, okay, fine, I was a Bernie person. I know many people that were. I never thought that Bernie was electable, but I like Bernie. I don't think he got much coverage at all. They would cover a little bit of his rallies, and then they just cut it off and go, "Well, there's
talking
Bernie
about the
talking again."
primaries
Yeah,
now?
yes,
Yes,
but
okay.
and with the campaign, it was Hillary's emails, Hillary's emails, Hillary's emails, over and over and over. Okay, I got it. She shouldn't have used a private server. Thank you for sharing. What else you got?
And then what's in the news?
Yeah, exactly.
But I think that,
Kushner.
but I just want to agree with you about the Stockholm syndrome here. I think that what we, fail to understand is that Donald becomes a cult of personality. And he had three basic phrases that caught on very well. Number one, and that put the media on defense, Clinton on defense, and the rest of America looking. One was that the media is rigged. Remember? It's against me.
Right.
Okay, so that had the media on defense. Number two is, what has she, meaning Hillary, done in 30 years of serving in government? That was so that put everybody in Clinton's camp on defense. And the third one was he places himself as the solution, if not the Messiah.
Yep.
I will make America great again.
I'm the only one.
That's the Messiah complex. So he becomes a cult of personality with a country that is fatigued by congressional gridlock. He saw himself as the answer.
The hypocrisy of him saying the media's rigged when he got so much media press. I mean, he didn't have to advertise. I mean,
the art of the
Well,
deal.
There was-
I mean, the thing that I said in our last show, and that bears repeating again, going back to the primaries, because I agree with you to, certainly people could read the Washington Post or other, good papers, excellent papers, and find out what Trump's background was like, what he had been doing, and so on. But most people don't do that. And so instead, they may be watching the news. And I remember that Chris Matthews early on, this was during the primaries, was giving Trump he was just covering his speech like for an hour.
Yep.
Now, not Marco Rubio or Jeb Bush
Or Bernie.
or Bernie or even Hillary. Okay, it was we're cutting away, and you'd go to this rally, and you'd just sit there in disbelief because it was like, what? Why is this news program? This is one candidate, and out of 17, who's giving
Every time he
a
spoke,
stupid speech
they
at a
covered it.
rally.
Yeah,
People
yeah,
are,
And will
going
someone
crazy
please
over it.
explain to me why he's still doing rallies? It's like, dude, you won, okay? So like, why
Well,
are
that's
they?
how you keep your base
But they're
happy.
still covering them. They're still
Yes.
covering them.
MSNBC
Right.
it was Donald Trump in Indianapolis or something on my way here. I was like, MSNBC, they were covering the whole thing.
So my question to you folks is this: Why is the media continuing? I mean, why are they? I agree, we have more fact checking now, all right, but it's still like Trump is leading the media around by the nose.
I have nothing but cliches for this because I really think
Why is this
imagine you're
happening?
one of the big networks or one of the big newspapers and you just go in, an editor goes in one day and is like, you know what, forget it. We're going to go cover some environmental stories. You go cover some immigration stories. You go cover this, and we're not going to play the same game. And you know what? Because for a month, people will say we want Trump saying nasty things, whether they like it or not. I think eventually a model and frankly, that's our model. I'm not always following the carrot, but that's what it is. It's just packed coverage, and that's why these poor reporters are all covering the same thing. We all obsess over what happens in the press room, where it's just lies.
Well, they're bosses, as you said before. Okay,
They run
all
it.
these white bosses,
and then they have
right?
bosses too, and then those bosses have the people who are.
So they don't want to break out of the pack because they're afraid they're going to lose.
Unfortunately,
They're going to lose money.
The
if
hurricane
they,
was the first thing that took over
Yeah.
Donald Trump 24/7
Yeah.
was the hurricane, and then that turned into the Trump hurricane.
And what's unfortunate is that it gets
Hurricanes.
ratings. It gets ratings.
Right.
And like it or hate it, the fact remains that the rising tide of Trumpism has lifted all boats. Every single cable network is getting ratings they never got before. All of the magazines, including the alternative magazines
That's a
like Mother
question
Jones,
I've always
and
had.
their subscription numbers, their websites are through the roof.
He's good for money, right?
Oh, he is.
He's good
Yeah.
for business, rather.
So,
He's good for business.
as a viewer, I always am trying to figure out, is it because of ratings or is it the agenda of the corporate owners of the media?
They're all friends of his.
The
They all
message
golf with
that
him.
I'm getting, because corporations sometimes do seem to be pushed by whatever the wave of society, if society's going yay for gay rights, then we're like, we're gay, yay for gay rights. But I've never been able to could it really be ratings?
Okay, well, he's the president though, and he can do a lot of damage now. So as much as I can't stand to see all this coverage, frankly, I run
Yeah.
a local journalism nonprofit. We're getting killed right now. We have donors who are only donating to national right now because everyone thinks they're going to get that silver bullet. Hey, I gave to
Wait, what
ProPublica.
does that mean?
We raise donations for local journalism.
Yeah.
We have a lot of donors who are not giving to us this year. They're not giving to us until Trump's out of office. They're giving to PBS. They're giving to ProPublica. They're giving to national. They're giving to Mother Jones. They're giving to the Nation,
And
which
the
all have
reason
nonprofit.
for that
because
is-
so they could sit around the dinner table with their yuppie friends and say, "Hey, I gave to the I gave to the
Is it
to
because
the publication
they don't
that
have
gave the
enough
silver,
money to go
silver bullet."
around and they?
Yeah, because basically the mentality now is that everybody wants Trump out. I'm glad that people are thinking about. I'm just giving how this is affecting the nonprofit
Yeah,
sector,
right,
but all
right.
these outfits. Here's the thing: as much as I can't stand to see this, by the way, the New York Times just started a nonprofit for this reason. So they're actually raising money to cover Trump. That's how anxious people on the left are to get him out of office. Now, at the same time, this is important coverage, whether it's the Russia investigation, whether it's all of these, these agencies that are completely underfunded and being stripped. And that's how a lot of the coverage is getting done.
And meanwhile, there's a civil war breaking out on the right that is getting covered a little bit. Like you just had this primary with Roy Moore, who says such
This
crazy
is
from
in
Alabama.
Alabama now,
yeah,
right?
Who says such crazy stuff that the cable networks are like, we can't quote some of the stuff
I
he
know.
says because
It's
we'll get
vulgar.
sued for slander. I mean, it's amazing.
Wasn't it
see, but this is
crazier?
But you have the
Yeah.
extreme, the Steve
Strange,
Bannon
right.
wing of the Republican Party, and what's left of the few moderates and the pro-business wing, and they're slugging it out, and it's just chaos.
But see, Donald
24/7.
comes into this narrative because this is where he tries to rewrite history. So as we all know, his candidate was Luther Strange. And what he's trying to do now, which is impossible, thank goodness, here, is to erase
Yes,
the
he's
tweets.
deleting the tweets, yes.
Oh yeah, the tweets.
Never supported him.
Right. So again, that forces attention on him again.
But I'm more interested in what is going to happen if someone like Roy Moore gets elected. You have someone who believes in theocracy. I mean, who believes that the government should be a Christian nation. No offense to Christians.
Aren't there a lot of
you know.
people who?
It's Jeff Sessions.
Yeah, a lot of.
But it's
a lot
Jeff
of them
Sessions
are-
on steroids.
The House of Rep is full of
we
them.
know that. We know that.
But my point is that instead of really covering issues like this, what did Trump
Right,
tweet
right.
today?
Well,
But you
recently,
can find it. I mean, honestly, I have kind of the problem where there's so much media, I don't know where to turn. I mean, my email get so many, like there's a lot of sites, there's a lot of journalistic, I mean, nationally.
there are a lot of outlets. That
There's
you
a
can
lot
go
of
to.
outlets.
For us, but for the average person, you're right, that people are feeling so overwhelmed, they're almost fatigued. They
Yeah.
just want like the quick and dirty, like tell me what the big stories are. And he's great at providing you that big storyline, whatever it is.
What happens, I think, is that we're not.
Wow.
Yeah, we are fatigued. We're fatigued with Trumpism, and with the the constant playing and repeat playing of his stupid tweets and his insults or whatever they might be, or throwing red meat to his rally supporters and so on. And it's like the media are like copycats, If CNN is doing it, well, then MSC's got to do it too, and then this one's going to do it, and then this paper's going to do it. So it's like Joan Bernanke is right. I mean, he's leading him around by the nose, but so much of what's going on, I mean, we don't know what's going on. I found out the other day, we know that there's a lot of appointments not made in this administration. Very important appointments.
Yeah.
The State Department is just one example. No ambassadors.
I don't think we have an ambassador to South Korea. Hello.
We don't. And I just happened to look at the Federal Trade Commission. I was giving a guest lecture in a class, and where I used to be a regional director. It's supposed to be 5 commissioners. There are 2.
Yep.
And they're acting.
Yep.
Okay, we have an acting
FEMA,
chair.
we don't have a FEMA
You don't
director,
have
do we?
So those stories. I mean, this is the way our government functions. And I don't care who is president. There's stuff that goes on that you're just not going to know unless you are in the agencies, either doing it or understanding that it's happening, or if you're a business or an individual affected by it. That's not new. I mean, there was a rollback of environmental regulations when George H.W. Bush was president that people didn't know about. So there's a lot of stuff, and there's a lot of good things that happened during the Obama administration that people didn't know about because they're, writing about regulations is not very
policy.
exciting.
It's
It's
wonky.
policy. But
Yeah.
the point is that so much is being rolled back by executive order,
Yes,
or
yes.
even without executive order. I mean, when George W. was in the White House, I had friends in the Civil Rights Division at Justice, and one of the things they were doing was to drag up old consent decrees, housing decrees, to see whether they were too stringent on the defendants who had committed civil rights violations. I can't even imagine what the Civil Rights Division must be doing now.
Well, look at Betsy
under
DeVos
Trump.
and what she did
Okay,
with the
so
rape
Trump
laws
and
on
with the rape.
campus.
I know.
So this is
I
the
know.
stuff.
I
Just to
know.
make it clear, all right. When we talk about that, and I am really very, I have fatigue of hearing about the knee being bent and the national anthem and so on, because it isn't that I get it. You hear it once, you understand it, but you have to hear it like 5 nights a week then. Read it about it every day. In the meantime, our rights are being dissolved. People are going to be, without adequate health care. Schools, what's happening in terms of federal funding for schools? Does anybody have any idea?
I just want to say this is the worst part is that it's one thing to talk about just football and knees, but this is a president who is bringing the military gear back to the streets.
Thank you.
And it's not like nobody's connected those dots, but that story should never be reported without talking about police
Right, the militarization of the police.
Stop and frisk, a number of issues. So, and frankly, and this is where I will fault all media. That is just to cover these protests, the football protests, superficially is a waste of everybody's time, and it's a perfect example
it's
of where
diversion.
they just could. And
Right.
the research is out there, from small alternative papers to ProPublica to Radley Balco at the Washington Post. Just all of this, that's a story that really could be told. They're giving it to them on a platter, and they're missing it.
And to allow the reframing of the story. For Mr. Trump is very masterful at taking a story, taking the facts and reframing them. So the football protest that Colin Kaepernick started, which was, as we all know, about racism and about police brutality, and Mr. Trump is now like, and see how they disrespect the flag and they don't love America, and now people are following that narrative. And it's
Right.
like, it wasn't
And what's-
about the flag in America.
And
It was-
what's so erroneous about it, and talking about narrowly sort of shaping a perspective about that, is that we have collapsed this notion that patriotism and men serving in the military as uniformly white, ignoring that we have people of color in the service before and then, like the
Absolutely.
Tuskegee Airmen
Yes.
who
Yes.
served this country,
Yes.
and it was very much about patriotism, but that because of othering us, that we come back to a different America. And so what the knee is about and what the protest is about and what Black Lives is about is that we want to hold you to that promise that all of us should have life, liberty, and pursuit of freedom. So that's the part of happiness. So that's it. And so he's very intentional to the point now that NASCAR has said that any of his men who do not show deference to when the flag and the anthem is being played will be thrown out of NASCAR.
Is that right?
Yeah. Well,
But Dale Earnhardt came out for,
Well, he can.
oh wait,
Yeah, that's
or
right.
Junior.
You see, I mean, it's more about
I'm not up on my
It is
NASCAR.
all, that
that's
was
the
a very
milita-
eloquent statement, Reverend Irene, in terms of what this is about, and so others will, it's one of the diversions. Not your eloquent statement, but the fact that Trump was not just tweeted about it, but that horrible speech that he gave in Alabama. What was going on? What else was going on? The discovery that Ivanka and Jared both used private emails in the White House. That was number one. That was like a one-day story. Well, what about that? What does that mean?
right.
Okay, why is it?
Hypocrisy.
Well, no, it's more than that. I mean, if you're doing, people in government sometimes do use private emails. Why? But if you're using it for government business, then it's a matter of public record. So, have there been any subpoenas asking for those? Have there been any Freedom of Information Act requests? I mean, there's a lot. There were other things going on. Mueller's all the speculation and stories about Manafort. And
the admission by Facebook
Yeah.
that Russian
Right,
trolls
exactly.
really did
After
target,
denials,
micro-target
right, okay.
certain.
So it's like there's you said it at our last show, Chris, the shiny object syndrome. You call it shiny objects, and that's what the media was following then. And so in terms of changes, I think it just seems that the Trump has just honed his shiny object skill to an even greater degree than he did before the election. And the media is only too happy, even though they're fact checking. It's like they don't know who they are yet. I think there's a little schizophrenia there. They'll go after him, they'll attack him. You're a liar. This is the fact. Blah blah blah. Oh, and now we'll spend a week talking about this tweet, or the week talking. In the meantime, regulations are being rolled back. What happened to what's going on with DACA? When was the last time you read anything about DACA or heard anything about DACA?
I read some today, I think, but yeah, I can't remember.
The deal,
what's going
the deal
on with
that
the
is
people?
the deal they were going to
postponed.
What's
negotiate is
going
collapsing.
on with those people? What are their lives like? If you don't know whether come March you're going to be able to be in this country or not, and you have to plan a life. There are so many things happening, and we are the media. I mean, I'm going to fault them for this. They have to decide what they're going to be.
They have to. I mean, frankly, I think that there's so much energy being wasted. To cover the Russia investigation, for example, that's a big money game. There are the big outlets that have that are in D.C. that can go to the hearings, that can sit outside, that can go talk to Paul Manafort's lawyers for 3 hours that they want to wrap. But all of these these second tier operations, and I don't mean like money wise. Like someone like Mother Jones, they should be doing that stuff. They do great reporting. But everyone else is just all of these kind of secondary outlets that could be covering Congress, that could be covering any number of these state issues. But they're not. They're covering Trump, and they're piggybacking.
Yeah. I think, and this is again where one's identity has a lot to do with how you look at the news or go after the news. So this is where alternative news and I'm not speaking for all people of color, but I grew up never trusting really even the New York Times because and I'm from New York, so it was the Amsterdam News. So coming out of a history of really not trusting the news to reflect my reality would go to Dig. So the story about Haitians going to Canada, that's spot on. Because that's what I need to know. That's not even going to be on local news here or even in the metro section of the Sunday Globe here. So in many ways, when we think about the news, we also are talking about white privilege. Because see, I've never had the privilege to assume that anything remotely close to what's going on in not even my neighborhood, Black America, is going to be reflected, with any kind of nuance and understanding. And without having to do this, because it's always about Black people having to explain Blackness to normalize it for white folks. So your story about the thing about Haitians going, it's sort of like what Toni Morrison does. You normalize that story like it's.
You can't compare Jake Boston and Toni Morrison.
Yeah, but you get my point. No, of course not.
Okay.
But
No,
in
but-
terms of normalizing the
No, I
story,
saw-
No, they're out
as
there,
opposed to
yeah.
making it other.
Oh, yeah, I saw a wonderful magazine cover, and I'm trying to remember which magazine it was because I subscribed to a lot of them. But it showed three white people, and it said, "The new face of addiction." And I'm like, so addiction wasn't an issue until white people got addicted?
Opioid, right.
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 Also, white people
thank
have
you.
been addicted to
Right,
drugs.
right. That's what. Yes.
But there's this mythology about the other that, of course they have problems. You know how they are. I mean, we've heard Congress people say like, well, if you're poor, then you just didn't work hard enough or this and that, So we have stories about this that are being covered, but they're being covered in terms of, oh my God, look, it's affecting white people. And
So I want to ask Reverend Irene a question. So how do you think, the manner in which the Trump administration plays to the crowd is a divisive manner. I think, whether they're going after immigrants or people of color, certain women, whatever it might be, in a way that I've never seen. It's like shocking. Some of the stuff you hear, you can't believe it. So how does that then, does that make the lives of minorities, people of color, people who may not be English not their primary language, is that going to make it even more difficult now because we're having this great divisiveness in the country that affects, where it is the other that, that's how dictators come to use power by scapegoating a group of people or some groups of people. So how does that make the community of the others, so to speak, feel or equipped to handle this era that we're in?
Okay, so someone like Donald Trump in Alabama, okay, and stuff. So if you grew up in the South, you don't even that's not even dog whistles. You know what that's about here, and you know that that's not where you're going to get your news. That's just
you
not,
already know that.
See, one of the things that we have to realize is that we still live under Jim Crow laws, even though we don't have the signs, put up visibly and stuff. So we've always had to find alternative ways to get our news, whether it's the radio. I mean, television today is even segregated. I mean, you go to either a black network, you go to Telemundo, you go to TV One, because even your local news channel, and you will have people of color there. Because again, that's controlled by what we call a white overseer in terms of how to report about the news here. So what we need to do is face the fact that until, as someone said here, that we actually do have a very diverse sort of, media, a diverse sort of journalistic base, we're going to continue to do that. But no one really takes no one's taking really what the Globe or the New York Times is saying, because you're not reporting about us.
Okay. So that's where
right.
it is right now.
Right.
And that's
I mean,
where
and
it's
if you
likely to
really want to
continue.
hear black news,
Okay.
everybody knows the Tom Joyner show, Yeah.
Okay.
And there's
Well-
also that parachute journalism too, where you
Yeah.
take somebody, you throw them into a community. We saw a lot of that hand wringing. You mentioned that about like, oh my God, if we had just reported more about East Overshoe, Arkansas, we would have made it more, more understandable. So we take a journalist, we parachute him or her into East Overshoe, have them live there for a couple of days and write about what it's like to live in East Overshoe. And
I want to give a shout out to
East
I want to
Overshoe?
give a shout out to there's 4 binges now, and one of them is the Arkansas Nonprofit News
right.
Network.
I was going to say, he just moved his office.
All right, well-
they're doing it, with reporters right there in Arkansas.
Okay.
We are out of
Good
time.
for you.
So just as expected, this has been indeed a very lively and very interesting and insightful discussion. I want to thank each of you for being here. Once again, Reverend Irene Monroe, Chris Faraone, Donna Halper, and Kristina Kehrer. Thank you all for coming tonight and participating in this conversation for Cambridge Uncovered. So really, you were all terrific, and you're so smart, and you're so insightful. So I'm Barbara Anthony, and I want to thank you all for watching. Until the next time, we'll see you at neighbormedia.org. Good night now.